Chapter 15. Gemini. The raining debris from the sarcophagi bursting open around us didn't distract my enemy. It closed in, both fists raised to chest level. A white aura surrounded them as its bones began to tremble. Purple tracers with black energy radiating inside them twisted around the white's body as it prepared its next attack. I planted my back foot and prepared to roll away, but another white charged into view on my left. My heart thumped as I recalled the warning. This was a hardcore area. These weren't low-level monsters, and we were greatly outnumbered. A blur of motion whipped into view. The new white slammed into the wall, then exploded into bone shards. Brugh grabbed the casting white around the neck. Its feet kicked desperately as he lifted it high and grinned wide. "Need a hand?" He ripped the torch free of the skeleton's grasp, shoved it into its gaping mouth, then slammed its skull into the wall. With brutal force, he slammed it again and again. Then he turned, holding aloft the remaining spinal cord. "By the goddess, this is fun!" Brugh spinned, then shoved his sword into another white's chest. A rib shattered, but the weapon pierced so deep the skeletal minion was able to grab the hilt. Due to the high strength of his opponent, the warrior struggled to pull it free. With another white bearing down and the weapon out of his control, he released the hilt, drew his arms out to his side, then clapped them against both sides of his enemy's head. The skull exploded into a cloud of dust. That white dispatched, Brugh grabbed the sword, tore it free, sliced through the next enemy as it charged. Rashan scurried past me to position herself at my back. I raised my sword. "Let's mess 'em up." Brugh turned and faced the oncoming crowd. "Allow me." The warrior surged forward, swinging his sword in devastating arcs, plowing through the rotted bones of the white's onslaught. When one attacker got too close, Brugh balled up one huge fist, then rammed it through the skull, shattering it. The remnants clattered to the stone floor. He gripped his sword with both hands, twisted, planted his feet, then twirled in a full circle, crushing more enemies. Stepping into the next turn, he shattered another. Soon, he was twirling in a dizzying frenzy of bone-shattering carnage. After the whirlwind came to an end, a white jumped on his back, another on his shoulder. Rashan tapped my shoulder. "Perhaps you should—" But Brugh reached behind him, snagged the neck of the white on his back, then flung it across the room to its demise. After that, he shrugged the occupied shoulder, rammed it into an emptied sarcophagus, then raked the white's spinal cord to dust against its edge. "Or maybe not," the priestess finished. Brugh sauntered over. He slapped the sword onto his back and grinned wide. "It's been too long," he spat a bone onto the floor, "since I crushed undead." He clapped my shoulder. "Let's go find the rest, huh? It's not fair we're having all the fun." They might be having fun of their own. After a glance at the carnage of shattered bones and erupted sarcophagi, I followed him out of the room. When I shared the quest to find the rest of our party, it adjusted so he'd still get XP for the missing members. That was cool. We transitioned from the stale scent of dusty death to the same moldy smell we'd encountered in the previous corridor. The greenish fuzz formed a thicker, fuzzier blanket in a wider hallway of the same stone bricks. A voice inside told me to set my blades ablaze and burn it all, but that just felt destructive. Or it was trying to keep me on my toes to ensure I was ready for violence. The hallucination that prefaced my adventure had me on edge, and truth be told, I couldn't even be sure Brugh and Rashan were real. Maybe Caym's reason for the hallucinatory introduction had been twofold. On one hand, he'd wanted me to read the tome, and I sensed that I'd actually been sent to the Greenlands outside the city when he told me to read it. But his secondary objective might have been to sow doubt as to whether I could trust my own party once I was with them. Maybe he'd hoped I'd run Rashan through the second I came out of it. At least the low grumbling in my companions' voices was gone. I took solace in that and decided to go with it. Rashan dropped back to walk beside me. "You seem troubled, unusually quiet." "Are you implying I'm usually a chatterbox?" "You've yipped incessantly, like a hellcat since the day I met you." She smiled, and somehow that simple gesture convinced me I was no longer hallucinating. It was the same expression I'd seen the day we met, and unlike earlier when my party was throwing me strange looks and acting unlike themselves, It was all Roshan.
So I worry when you go quiet.
Sometimes your calm disturbs me. Even a room full of skeletons doesn't seem to get your blood up.
You would rather I lose my senses?
She threw her arms up and waved her hands erratically.
Completely lose control so you can rally me and feel heroic?
She guffawed. Brugh threw a quick glance over his shoulder, shook his head in derision, then resumed his march forward. No, I like you how you are, but we're in the middle of a dungeon that can only lead to the worst kind of trouble, and you shrug it off. I don't understand how you stay so calm. Roshan sighed.
Before you came along, I was trained to be a priestess. For years I hid my affinity for magic and my training with Master Mitwa. If you'd met my father, understood the level of wrath he brought down when he learned I was being trained, you'd understand why I fear nothing. I had faith Solara would take my spirit to her bosom. But now that you've bound me, I can't even die. So what is it exactly that I should be scared of?
Her question sent another shuffling through my mind. Why are you worried? What's the worst that could happen? This was a game world. I knew that. So why was I letting it get on my nerves? The answer came just as quickly, and I voiced it aloud. You know the day we met, when we first saw Caym in that frame in Kroll's lair? Roshan nodded.
It's not the kind of thing one forgets.
Exactly. That was only my second day in this world. In one way or another, meeting all of you, rescuing you from the governor, taking out the Warsager, all of it has led me toward this conclusion. It's not that I'm worried. It's that I'm excitable. But I had my hatred of failure, and the fact we all walked through that portal and ended up in different places. Then the asshole demon underlord tried to trick me into reading the tome I came to destroy. Wrinkles creased her forehead as Roshan tilted her head to the side. She raised her eyebrows in query. I'd been about to say, this fucker doesn't play fair. But how obvious was that? How many times had my inner dialogue led me to the realization Enora didn't play like other games? Hell, I kinda loved it for its originality. So why did I expect anything less? Somehow that made me feel better. You're right, Roshan. We need to focus on finding our people and getting this crap done. She nodded.
If this is your destiny, embrace it.
Yeah, I'll start embracing it when Priya's at my side again.
Now this concern, we share.
Ahead, Brugh stopped and knelt at a fork in the hallway that merged with several other passages. I circled around the crouching human grizzly, then stared down the pathway he indicated where a humanoid with gray skin and no eyes in its sockets leaned against the wall, its head turned so I couldn't see its face. A slim rectangular depression furrowed deep into the side of its temple.
Zombie. Level 41. Undead. Deceased. These spiritless bodies feed on the flesh of living things.
Well, that was basic.
Strength, 0. Dexterity, 0. Intelligence, 0. Wisdom, 0. Constitution, 0. Charisma, 0.
Roshan knelt next to Brugh.
Do you think Giles came across this one?
I shook my head and pointed at the depression. It was a long, deep gash with smooth edges, but for the center where the flesh striated. Not a blade wound. If I had to guess, it was made by the tip of Machini's boomerang. It's the right size. I twirled my finger in a circle around the deep wound, and it evidently didn't return when she threw it, so she wrenched it out of there. Brugh reached beneath the zombie's chin, then tipped up its head to reveal a wide gash from ear to ear. Seems she was with her sister. Even though the killing blow had probably been Machini's work, zombies didn't care if they got their throats cut. The slash across the neck was too wide to have been made by one of Giles or Amelia's daggers, so I agreed. Somehow Destiny had sliced its throat from behind with her sword. Nice work, too. She'd almost severed the head, but the way it had fallen against the wall had shoved its chin to its chest and hidden the wound. 5 hallways led in different directions, but no torches lined them. I cast inner illumination and peered down each in turn. A few drops of dark liquid trailed into one passage, and I kneeled to touch one. My finger came away red. I think I know which way they went. Brugh, do you have a way to see in the dark? He stood and yanked a torch from the hallway we'd exited. This'll do.
Or I could light the way for you.
I swung around to spy a figure standing at the far end of the hallway, to the left of where I'd found the blood. Orange light bloomed and 2 hands held low to cast a glow on a male figure with a scraggly white beard falling halfway down his chest. The reflective sheen of a purple robe contrasted his otherwise disheveled appearance. A massive fireball grew in his hands, then he raised them and hurled it toward us. "Duck!" I dove to the ground. Rashawn landed on top of me. The Brug grunted and dove into another hallway. The fireball zoomed overhead, then down another passage. It vanished a moment later instead of slamming into a wall like I'd expected. Maybe it evaporated when the spell reached its range limitation. The second Rashawn rolled off my back, I scrambled to my feet, then charged. My swords came free of their sheaths in a natural motion as I closed. The caster hustled around the curve in the passageway. When I closed on the spot where he'd been standing, I slowed, then peered around the curve. Brug shone his torch down the hallway, which was too long for us to see the end. I released a breath I hadn't realized was captive in my lungs. "He's gone." Brug growled like a curious grizzly. "Must have blinked through the wall." He shrugged as if this happened every day. "No good letting him distract us from our path. You found blood, yeah?" "Yeah." "Then we should go that way." I agreed. Then we turned back toward Rashawn, but every few steps found me glancing over one shoulder to ensure the caster hadn't returned. Brug chuckled. "Don't worry, Mythic. I know his kind. Casters that old are heady types. Think they can toy with you. He wouldn't have telegraphed such a long cast if we were more than sport." That makes me feel so much better. The warrior flicked his wrist. It was only level 52. No armor. I'd snack on his bones." That he analyzed the caster in the time it took me to dive to the floor served as proof I needed to get my mind right. To be so nervous about wrapping up the longest arc in the history of gaming wasn't going to serve me. As we continued up the corridor, we stepped around the droplets of blood as if they'd burn holes in the soles of our footwear. The passage was wide enough that we fit 3 abreast despite Brug's massive shoulders as he strode along the center. He sniffed. "The stench of this place grows worse with every step." I nodded. In the distance stood 2 massive doors with intricate engravings swirling about their faces. "You see that?" Brug raised the torch. "I see 10 feet in front of me. Your spell aids you." "Right." I raised a finger. Double doors straight ahead. No side halls. The twins went in there. "Twins?" That's what I call the Michonne sisters. Inside joke. "Humph." We approached the door. Then Brug ran the torch along the engravings. "No discerning symbols I know of. Just a bunch of wavy lines."
"Maybe that means something," Rashawn said. "Perhaps the inhabitants appreciated the grandeur of it."
Brug gave a single, curt nod. "Can never hurt to know an enemy's mind, priestess. I like the way you think." He pulled on the massive iron door handles. "Wait!" I barked. All we needed was to walk into a trap and blow up. Or melt. Or dissolve. The hinges creaked and groaned as he drew them toward us. Despite my reservations, I stood on tiptoes to ponder from over his shoulder. Brug swept both hands toward the interior. "See? You worry too much, Squirt." A sprawling interior room was cast in light through a glass dome overhead lined with metal not unlike the iron of the doors. Rows of stadium-like seats formed a pentagon around a stone-tiled floor. In the center stood the long-bearded caster in the purple robe, one leg bent at the knee as his bare foot pressed into Michonne's back. The Michonne lay chest down. Black vines protruded from the stone floor, their loose ends binding her wrists, elbows, and ankles. A wooden boomerang lay 20 feet away near a long, dust-laden table surrounded by aged and cracked high-backed chairs. "There," Brug muttered under his breath. Then he cocked his head to the right. I followed his gaze to the stadium seating on the far right, where I found a Cine crouched behind one of the backs. Brug blew a short sigh. I drew my lips and then flicked my tongue across them. "You don't have to be so obvious." "He's looking right at her. He knows she's there." The caster turned to peer in our direction, then squinted against the light from above. Ah, you're here. Good. A short cackle of laughter emanated from his throat, then stopped as quickly as it had started. He raised his foot from Machini's back to step to the exact center of the floor. His arms drew up into a V, gazed up at the high ceiling, then turned in a slow circle. I'm afraid the Magisterium isn't what it used to be. A grin swept his aged features into a twisted shape, then a stream of snaking light shuffled from his hairline to his chin, revealing the bone structure of his skull underneath. I haven't gotten around to tending it of late. Low cackles again, then he swept his hand across his mouth. His head swiveled in short strokes to take each of us in. Then his face went slack, and his next words came low. You! After all this time! He pointed toward me. I suppressed a flinch at the sight of his grotesque injury, a long wound running from his wrist to his elbow. The surrounding skin was green, the flesh inside purple and dry. He took a few lingering steps forward. But how much time? His chin raised as he peered through the skylight. I wondered what the light's source was, as I'd assumed we'd been underground the whole time, but it looked like daylight. He cackled again. The clicking rattle of his throat began to grate on my nerves. One of many annoyances in this cursed place, you know. Time! I've eyed zeros on my interface for ages. Tell me, how long has it been? I turned my hands over, then raised my palms toward the ceiling. How long has what been? Oh, I don't suppose you'd know, would you? He giggled. No, I don't suppose you would. Who the hell are you? I asked. The laughter died. Then the caster cleared his throat. I am Morgan Dufresne. My former colleagues, he gestured around the empty seats, called me Morgan the Grim. That's enlightening. I winked my eyes in succession. Morgan the Grim. Demi-human. Demi-humans are cursed beings whose hearts have stopped in their chest, but whose bodies haven't died. Level 54 wizard. Strength 12. Dexterity 19. Intelligence 159. Wisdom 84. Constitution 127. Charisma 13. I looked around the cavernous, mostly unoccupied space. And where are these former colleagues now? Ah! That single syllable carried on for a few seconds. Long gone, I'm afraid. His forehead scrunched up and thick, gray, unkempt eyebrows furrowed. Because of your kind, he coughed, bringing a cloud of dust from his throat. My head jerked back involuntarily. My kind? You mean mythics? Ha! I mean the cursed Shenhua fool. Cursed came out in 2 syllables. I owe my depraved existence to your band of Enoran traitors. His head tilted, then his eyes tracked upward again. Well, one in particular. But after all this time, how long has it been, I wonder? Maybe you could shed some light on your situation, then we'd be happy to help you figure it out. But first I'm going to need you to release my companion. The wizard dropped his gaze from the skylight. What? He twisted toward Machini as if he'd forgotten she was there. Oh, yes, of course. He waved a hand, then more decrepit black vines surrounded her. A split formed in the stone beneath her. Her body thumped into the crevice, and she let out a yelp of desperation. The wizard wheeled back around. Now that you see who's in charge, you'll show some respect, if you even value your companions. Your predecessor certainly didn't. Who are you talking about? Huh! He cackled again. I'm talking about Archmage Arturus.